For this video, I wanted to talk about text interpretation, and that's sort of a stuffy phrase. So when I say text interpretation, I mean, generally speaking, the analysis of like a book is like usually what I'm going to mean by that. You can also use it to, obviously, things other than books, quotes, any kind of written object is a text, but even more abstractly, maybe a song could be considered a text, or a poem, or a movie. You could take a lot of different sorts of data streams or external contentful objects as being texts. But in any case, the most easy one to think about is going to be words. So in this video, I want to talk about different common views on how to interpret texts. I want to compare them to each other a little bit, and then I want to talk about my whole angle on this thing, which takes the text interpretation process in a slightly different direction than I usually hear it talked about, and I thought that you might find it interesting. One attitude on analyzing texts focuses a lot on memorization. And so, a lot of times this is what happens in school. They say read the chapter, and then they ask you questions and make sure that you read the chapter. And so you learn either by direct instruction or just by osmosis that the purpose of reading is to remember what the words were, remember what the key points were, maybe if you're going to add a little bit more analysis, right? Because the minimum amount of analysis is, forget even the words, you could just remember the string of text. And then you could say, well, it starts with the word once upon a time. Well, really it starts with O-N-C-E space, right? So you can tell that this kind of copy-paste memorization doesn't, at least by necessity, have to require your mind to chew up the content therein, right? Because you could remember the letters, you could remember the words, you could remember the sentences. In any case, you're sort of just expected to spit it back out. When we talk about that, strict memorization type, no one really loves that. No one really in their heart of hearts wants that to be how reading works. And I don't think that that is how reading works when it's going well. There's a second school of thought on analyzing texts, which says that the text has a true meaning, and by looking at it, we can figure out what its true meaning is. And so, for example, when you read a mathematical formula, or when you read like a scientific study, the thought is, or like an economic theory, right? The thought is that each of these describe an object out in the world, and you might or might not ascertain it. You might or might not figure out the truth about what that object is. So if you see the numbers in the formula and you think to yourself, well, this is a cool piece of art. I like how the line is drawn in the middle and there's that cool squiggly on the side with the, I guess they call that one epsilon or whatever. It's clear that you're missing something important about what the meaning of that mathematical formula really is. And so that's, something presumably intended by the author of the formula. Or even beyond that, you might think that the formula corresponds to a real object in the world. In a sense, its true author is not the human who wrote it down, but maybe its true author is the universe. Just to give another example of that one. If you're reading about tectonic plates, right? Who made the tectonic plates? It wasn't the author. The author has some intended meaning. They have something that they want you to get from their description of the tectonic plates. But the real win is knowing something about, rock and fissures and like geothermal energy, or however tectonic plates work. So that second school of thought is more like admirable than the pure memorization one, and that second school of thought focuses on gleaning what is true that is beyond the text. A third school of thought, and again, I don't know if this is a canonical breakdown, but the third school of thought says that what matters is not the truth intended by the author or the truth in the world referenced by the text, but rather your reaction to it. So in this version, maybe you read some poetry, or you read a book like The Scarlet Letter, and you read The Scarlet Letter and you say, This makes me feel horrible. It is horrible that they did this thing to that woman. They made her wear this letter on her chest. And to me, my childhood was, there was this time where I was condemned by my peers for, being the one that made it so that everyone had to take an extra quiz. Maybe you were like a teacher's pet or something like that. And so this is a type of analysis where what you're doing is the text sort of has some reflection in you, and the work of this third method of interpretation is identifying what that reflection is. So what is your reaction? How does it make an impression on you? What do you see in yourself, right, that is brought to light by this prompt of the text? So just to recap, we had our first method, which is focused on memorization, which essentially doesn't involve the investigation of any particular thing. You don't really investigate an object in the world, you don't investigate an author's intent, and you also aren't looking inward at yourself in order to get some value from the text. You're simply copying the form of the thing. The second method, as I described, involves looking outside of yourself. The third involves looking within. And so I want to talk about a fourth method that is compatible, not with the first one. I think the first one's stupid. It's compatible with the second method and the third, but it's a little bit weird, so I'll try to explain what I mean. So in this fourth method, I try to focus on how have you been shaped by the text. Now, initially, this might sound like a very subjectivist approach. So it might sound like I'm very focused on feelings and personal impressions, and sometimes it does go that way. However, imagine that you're reading something hyper-intellectual, again, like you're reading about the tectonic plates. If you're someone for whom the understanding of tectonic plates is important to your life, like for whatever reason, what you want is to be shaped by the text insofar as it corresponds to the outside world. And so let's say you have some views on how tectonic plates work, and you read this book, some new great book on the tectonic plates. What you want is for your views to be shaped by the book's views to the extent that the book's views improve yours, right? And you could say this for any analytical or intellectual area. You're reading about chemistry. You've got some views on chemistry. You've got some opinions on chemistry. Some of them are right, some of them are wrong. Some of them are more well investigated or studied. Some of them are just bullshit or completely confused. And so when you encounter some text that you think has something of value in it, what you're trying to do is sort of bring in that knowledge in order to shape your own, so that when you leave the text, you carry with you some kind of impression, right, that improves you, some kind of betterment. Now, that's for the analytical side of this fourth method, which is about the shaping of the person by the text. But what about this like emotional or subjective side? Let's say you're reading something like, Marcus Aurelius, right? You're reading something like the Bible. Or you're reading, I happen to have next to me while I was thinking about this, The Zen Way to the Martial Arts by Tyson Deshimaru, right? And so let's open up this book and, find some kind of quote that you might want to be shaped by. So in here, this is awesome, right? It's just a little bit of dialogue, and it says, "Perhaps I should simply respond as Master Deshimaru did when he was asked a similar question. How many years do I have to practice Zazen? Until you die." Okay, so this is awesome. This is some cool-ass, martial arts Zen shit. How many years do I have to practice Zazen until you die? Now, there's something kind of that would be kind of foolish about interpreting this in a hyper-analytical way, where you can imagine the good student studiously reading this and they say, "Oh, how long do I have to practice Zazen?" "Well, it's until you die." And they write it down in their book of facts and then go on with their life thinking that they've been improved by it because there they have the fact right at hand. It's clear that this would be a misuse of the text because there's something in it that is more directly shaped at you, the person, not in terms of your intellect, but more like in terms of your soul or in terms of your behavior. And my guess would be, just from that little quote, that the point of how long do you have to practice Zazen until you die is some kind of clarification, right? Some kind of spiritual realignment, right? You could apply this to all kinds of things. And so it's like there's a mindset of skill development here where maybe whatever your work is, or your profession, or your practice, or the thing you want to become amazing at, maybe that attitude is improved by running into this quote. So if you're like a car mechanic, and it's like, how long do I have to practice mechanics until you die, says the Zen master, right? How long do I have to practice being a good partner to my husband or wife until you die, right? And there's it's clear here, again, I'm a little bit reiterating, but just to try to get this across, that the purpose is the shaping of the self, the shaping of an attitude. And so if you walk off with that written in your book, you haven't gotten the point, you haven't gotten the value. Rather, you need to walk away from the text as a better person, one who intends to practice until they die, or whatever, if that's right for you. If that's, you're not supposed to be taking these things in unreflectively, but insofar as you want to be shaped in that way, or insofar as it's good for you to be shaped in that way, that's what the point of the text is. And so, just to recap, this fourth method, which I wish I had a name for it, the shaping method of reading or something like that. The purpose of texts is to be shaped by them in the appropriate way and on the appropriate dimensions. And so, to the extent that the text is intellectual and shows you truth in a normal analytical sense, the purpose is to shape your views, shape your opinions. To the extent that the work is spiritual or the work is artistic, frequently, the purpose is to show you something that you hadn't seen before and really take it into your heart, right? Take it into your body as something that changes how you live in the world and what it means to be you as a person. There's this, to reference another Japanese text, the Book of Five Rings by Miyamoto Musashi, is this old esoteric text about ostensibly swordsmanship, though, of course, being this kind of esoteric thinker, Musashi says these things apply at every level of abstraction. And so he believes that it applies to, the individual fighting an opponent with a sword. It applies to armies and nations and who knows what else. And there's an interesting thing about the Book of Five Rings, which is over and over and over again, he says something like, at the beginning of the chapter usually, you have to take these truths into your body, or you have to study this sincerely, or do not merely memorize this, learn this with sincerity, or whatever it is. And I guess it's in part from reading that I got the idea of this mindset that the point is not what you remember. The point is not what you can spit back out. In many cases, the point is not even your intellectualization or your clever thoughts about a thing. The point is, how do you act? How are you different after running into a text? That's all for now. I hope you found this interesting or useful. I guess my shoulder YouTuber tells me that now's the time where you're supposed to ask them to follow you if they like your stuff. I can't get myself to do it. I can't get myself to ask, but I'll see you next time by some means.